You're listening to If We Were Writing, a feisty triathlon-ish podcast. I'm Kelly O'Mara, and together with Sarah True, we head up a weekly group ride where we dish on all triathlon news and everything else-ish we want to talk about. We're joined regularly by Khadijah Diggs and Jocelyn Wong-Neal, and Laura Siddall does her Sid Talk segment updating you on everything you need to know from the weekend. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If We Were Writing is a production of Live Feisty Media. Join us on our group ride. Feisty triathletes. This is Kelly from If We Are Writing, and for the next 2 weeks, we have a treat for you all. We're going to be sharing the first 2 episodes of Feisty's Special Olympics podcast, Croissants and Commentary, Moments on the Road to Paris. Now, in this 9-episode Olympics series, Sarah Gross and I are diving into the history of the games, how athletes qualify and why, and then we're going deep on topics that we know affect our Olympians, like fueling, postpartum return to sport, mental health. You can listen to the whole series on the Feisty Women's Performance podcast feed. Check the link in the show notes. And the If We Were Writing crew will be back with our regular group rides after the 4th of July holiday. We just needed a 2-week break here while everyone's off doing different things. In the meantime, we hope you enjoy these 2 Croissants and Commentary episodes and get as excited for Paris as I am.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 2 of Croissants and Commentary, Moments on the Way to Paris. Kelly, how the hell are you?
I feel like it's on the road to Paris, Sarah.
Oh, what did I say?
The way.
On the way.
on the way. Whatever.
You don't have to take a road. You can take a plane. You can take a boat.
That feels very
You're just on your way to Paris.
Metaphorical for our topic this week. However you get to Paris.
Right.
You do you.
Exactly. Because this week we're talking about the selection process and the trials and all of these things that, like, I don't necessarily really understand at all. And then we're going to talk, and then it's going to lead into a discussion, I think, about, like, what the heck is the point of the Olympics anyway?
Right.
So.
I like how you just teased that by, you guys should stay around and listen because I know nothing.
Yeah. We're relying heavily on Kelly. Oh.
In all fairness, though, I think you do, like, we're going to talk about trials because of the whole thing with the Olympics, right? Is like you only pay attention every 4 years, but not you, many people, but there's all this stuff that goes into it. And it's this huge, huge moneymaker. And like, kind of how did we get to this point when, you know, the way that someone gets to that money-making stage is like some random event in some town you've never, right? Like never been to, can't watch on TV. Like there's no, so it's, you know, it's all this stuff that happens behind the scenes.
Yeah, no matter how you set it up, trials like going to be random to some extent.
Yes.
And the selection process, which I am like, actually, I'm very interested in and keen to dive into. But Kelly, like, I need to know first, like, how's your week been? Have you had like a highlight or like a sports highlight of the week?
Sports highlight?
Something that happened?
Well, I was telling you, I am like punched in the face with allergies. So my personal life highlight has not been high. But I did go to a baseball game.
Or like, you went to a baseball game. What baseball game did you go to?
The Giants. Well, I live in San Francisco, and they the A's are leaving. For people who follow mainstream sports, this has been a whole thing here. I don't feel like that is you. Like,
nope.
But I went to a Giants baseball game, and oh my God, it's so boring. Like that was my major takeaway. I
made the joke before the show, men's sports are boring. Don't come after me, men's sports are not boring. But Kelly and I went to a baseball game once together. And like, I have to tell you, Kelly is the person who, like, you know how there's like all the games in the, like before you get there, there's like the little thing where you can run shuttle sprints and you could like try to throw a ball into a basket and like all these things to do. Kelly's like all of the games. She's like, Sarah, come on, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this.
Why else do they have them, Sarah? What else is there to do at a baseball game? The only other thing people do at baseball games is like fill in their stat sheets. Now, I've been to many baseball games, and that is something one of my friends used to do. She'd like bring her whole notebook of like stats, because that's what you do at baseball games, is you just like write down stats. And I feel like that probably has fallen off in the internet era because you don't need to write them down anymore.
Right. But I can see where that's how you get into it, right? Because if you don't understand the stats and what's at stake, it's hard to get into the game. I feel you.
I was so bored. I was like, I mean, it was like, obviously it's like a social activity and you're there with friends and you're having beers, but I was like, oh my God, how is this a mainstream sport? And people are like, oh, you know, women's basketball, that'll never make it. Like, what?
Exactly. Okay, on a my personal highlight of the week was
Yeah.
that, how about that like sub 29 10K
Oh, yeah.
at the Prefontaine Classic? Like, what the heck? And like 9 women, I heard this from you, so I'm just telling it
It
back to
ended up
you.
not being
Like,
9. They were saying 9
no,
women, and then it was only like 4. But
4 women ran under 30 minutes for the 10K. Still a lot.
still a lot,
Mhm.
because there's only like 22 before this weekend that had ever done it.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's huge. So yay women's running.
Yeah, he was running. The interesting thing I found about that was, so it was on the track, new world record in the 10K, 28:54, first like sub 29. But the world record on the road is actually like 10 seconds faster than that because of the men. Because it's a world record from a mixed race with like the men and women running together. And like then you're able to like draft and pacing and like all that. Yeah.
Interesting. So the world record for the women's 10K on the road is faster than on the track. And I'm assuming that in the men's race, because they don't have another gender faster than them to draft off of, then they
don't have that kind of discrepancy. Because women on the road have the World Athletics actually only ratifies women's only world records, like where there's a women's only marathon, or what often happens is they start the women far enough ahead, that they don't get interfered with. But obviously we all like, we know what the actual, you know what I mean? Like they don't ratify mixed records, but we all know them anyway. Like they still exist.
Right.
They are, but there's 2 categories for women. There's the like mixed and the women's only, but the mixed, is faster than on the track. It's crazy.
Interesting. But I'm assuming that in the men's race that the times are faster on the track.
Yeah.
Consistently. Interesting. Huh. Okay. There you go. I learned something. But anyway, 28:54. That's an amazing 10K time. And we're thrilled. We're thrilled.
I will. Here's the other interesting thing about that. To transition, you're gonna like our transition to our topic. So the reason it was so fast, the reason that so many people ran a fast 10K at the pre-classic in Oregon, is because Kenya had announced that was going to be the 10K Olympic qualification event for the Kenyan team. Right. So you got like 9 Kenyan women and then like an Ethiopian and like so that's why. But the other thing that's fascinating is so the woman in 4th place, who then runs like a 29:30, doesn't make the Kenyan team. Right. Which is crazy.
Yeah. Are there sports, like, is it true? Like, are there sports where, or if we just opened up the Olympics to like, you could qualified the, the top 30 fastest women in the world qualify for the 10K. Would most of them be from like Kenya and Ethiopia?
Yeah. Absolutely. 100%, which obviously is like not really the point of the Olympics. Or like when you look at the Winter Olympics, they had to like stop it from being all Norwegian. It was getting like boring, So there's obviously it's different events for different countries for different events and different sports. But if you just did the best 30 10K runners in the world, it would be like, which is why the Kenyan they have like their own internal national champs. And that's like very, very, very competitive, like very intense, like harder than the world championships. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we do it like that? I feel like this is the segue.
This is what you're, we don't do that because you get back, well, it's kind of like, what is the point of the Olympics, right?
Yeah.
And the point of the Olympics is not just to have like the best athletes. Obviously that is like where it comes from, but it's the best athletes from every country, right? Like the point of the Olympics is also, and I would have to like look up exactly what Coubertin, said was his mission.
I looked it up.
Okay. But it was about like kinship and understand brotherhood and that kind of thing, right? Did you look it up? You're going to tell us?
I did. So, okay. So interesting. Okay. So I couldn't get like a really good quote, like just that would summarize it. I read 2 or 3 articles and I didn't quite get there, but he said like, I lift my glass to the Olympic idea, which has traversed the midst of the ages like an all-powerful ray of sunlight and returned to illuminate the threshold of the 20th century with a dream of joyous hope. Like, I think he really thought that the Olympic Games was going to change humanity, So just for context, this is like Baron Pierre de Coubertin, who was like the founder, who is credited as being the founder of the modern Olympic movement. But he got mad, after 1896 in Athens, he complained that like there was too much focus on the sport and not enough focus on like Congress and conference, and like there was no sign of like moral, education or purpose. Like he really was about like how sport was changing society and like international relations, really.
And by society and international relations, he meant Western white men. Yeah. Like that is like as far as they could envision at the time. Like they were like, whoa, Austria. That's like they're like going out, right? Or Ireland, I guess, actually would have been the like redheaded stepchild of the time. So that was the original idea. And then like obviously it's like grown and involved over time. So it's like now we're at this point where that really is the idea of the Olympics, is to like bring together all people, right? Like people from every country, the best of each country come together. I am not like, we can talk about all the ways that's been corrupted in a second, but that is the ideal, right? That's why you like have all these things against like protests during the Olympics, against like politics during the Olympics, because it's supposed to be a time to like common ground. We can all run 10K. Well, no, some of us somehow. And then obviously, I mean, women weren't allowed at the first Olympics. The early ones, actually were, again, like mostly British, French, some Italians, some Americans. And you look, and then like, I want to say it was the one that was at the same time as the St. Louis World Fair was like all American, like Americans like won everything, because they were kind of trying to just like, this is like my husband does a yearly climbing trip, and there's some years where they just like walk up the hill behind our house so that they can like keep the annual tradition alive. And that's what the 1904, 1908 Olympics were in my head. Yeah.
It was all falling apart. So a bunch of guys just went out and competed in a few things. They did a bit of wrestling and like, is that true?
Well, there was like the one that was at the same time as the World's Fair, like the
yeah.
So those early ones, they are like heavily European, heavily American. It's not till later that we get women. It's not till much later that we get like other countries, and obviously that's came with all its own like weird racist ideas and all that. And now it's like really evolved, and now the Olympics has these like things in it to. There's spots called like new flag spots, which means like a new country, a country that otherwise like wouldn't have a person in that event.
Yeah.
There's like different criteria for new flag spots. There's universality spots, which used to be called something else, but those are for like, when you watch like the 100-meter dash, like the prelims where there's like the people from like every country in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's certain events that are designated to be like the everyone events.
Yes, because I've known some people who have these spots.
Yes, my husband tried to get one of these spots.
Eastern countries and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, my husband tried to get it for Ireland for skiing, because that's diverse.
Desperately underrepresented in
skiing. Yeah.
And Steve was there to save the day.
Right. So there's one event that he qualified for that they don't like let you do any. Like, they don't want you like mixing it up in like the cycling road race, because that would be like. I mean, I actually think there's a couple of people that do, but you know what I'm saying? Like there's certain ones that they let people in, there's certain ones they don't. And you do still have to hit like a standard, right? You still have to be top 140 in the world or top 200 or hit a B standard. Like it depends on the sport. It's not just like anybody. Yeah, you do.
So how did, what was he called? The swimmer, Eddie the Eel? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Eddie the Eagle?
Well, there was Eddie the Eagle, but there was like a swimmer. And I'm just passing over the names.
Yeah, you probably just mixing that up there.
There was also a swimmer who was like,
well, there's also,
I guarantee you not in the top 140 in the world.
Yeah, so they've cracked down because over the years, there have been people who have found, I mean, I don't want to call them loopholes, but obviously that's what then got said a lot was like, oh, how do we have, a snowboarder who doesn't know how to snowboard, or a skier who's like falling over in the start gate, like, and people get really upset about that. Mm-hmm. And so then they have cracked down now on those spots. And so you do have to hit, like, you have to prove you know how to ski, right? Or like the one my husband qualified for, like there was a B standard. It was the Olympic B standard he had to hit, right?
He was still a pretty good skier.
He is still a pretty good skier, yeah. But then so they basically have made those somewhat harder because of all this like outrage, which is, I'm up and down on whether, I'm up and down on that, right? Like I actually feel like the guy from Mexico who it was like his third time skiing ever. Do you remember that Olympics like 6 years ago? I was actually all like for him, right?
Yeah.
Apparently the skiers were embarrassed and like fists cracked down then after that because they thought he embarrassed them. But I was like, no one would have watched without him. Nobody cared. Yeah.
No, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's great. There's go over again the spots. I know there's refugee spots.
There are refugee spots. Now those I don't know that they have to necessarily hit as like I think that is a little more wide open because they're refugees. We're not going to be like go to a pool and hit a time if there are no pools.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Though, so the refugee spots, we'll talk about that. Then there are what are now called universality spots.
Okay, what does that mean?
I don't know. I mean, universality means universal, Sarah.
I know what universality means. What does it mean in terms of qualifying?
It varies. It varies
sport by
sport. It varies sport by sport. So like triathlon has 4 or 5 universality spots, and the way they allocate them is like they have certain criteria, like for countries that not otherwise like wouldn't be there. They do have like you have to be top 200 in the world, right? Like there are certain criteria in triathlon. The marathon, for example, has some universality spots, and those just got awarded a week or two ago to like again like some countries that like otherwise wouldn't, or like people who otherwise wouldn't get to go. And there was a lot of controversy because those universality spots then filled up the field in the marathon, and now America's not going to get to send a third person probably. So Americans were like signing a petition to like let our third guy go. I again kind of whatever. New flag spots are like universality spots are kind of by discretion is what I'm trying to say. Like the governing body of that sport sort of just decides like what they're going to do. They're more like it happens in para as well because para is a lot harder to have competition. Like there are a lot fewer competitions around the world. So universality spots are kind of like not more, but very common. They call them tripartite too, like just to make things more confusing. Whatever. Yeah. But they kind of just decide, right? Like they just sort of are like, you people have earned this spot and they just hand them out. But whereas like new flag spots are very distinctly like your country only gets one if your country does not otherwise have an athlete in that event for that gender.
Okay.
And then those have a higher, like you have to be top 100 or, you know what I'm saying? Like those are harder.
Yes. I think those are great. You know why? Because it's like, it encourages development of that particular sport in that country.
That's
right?
the idea.
It's like the see it, be it thing. Like you have someone who got this spot to the Olympics, you can see them do it, you know, and the kids, the young people and the kids can all aspire. Then they don't sit there and think, oh, well, no one from my country has ever gone to the Olympics.
I think like a really interesting example is I think now, like I'm not 100% sure about this, but back in the day, Flora Duffy, who now is like the Olympic reigning champion, got one of these like, let's get Bermuda. You know, I mean, she was good enough. She was good at the time. She was like 60th or 70th or something in the world. But the Bermuda got a like, there's never been a Bermudan triathlete, right? Like, so she got one of those spots. And now this year, there's 3 triathletes from Bermuda. One of them has a, you know, in a country of 60,000 people. That's insane, by the way.
That's insane.
That's insane.
Yeah. Or one time back in the day, and I'm sorry, I forget her name, and I forget her name, but I interviewed the woman from Bahrain who was the first woman from Bahrain to compete in swimming in the Olympics. And like, if you imagine like in a place where like women are normally covered, right? And it's like, that's the tradition, right? So now you have this whole, and she was a legit swimmer. Like she had an NCAA scholarship. She wasn't like,
she like knew how to, she was a good swimmer.
She was a good swimmer. Yeah. And so like but you could see it, like when I was in Bahrain, you could see that she had definitely encouraged a generation of girls to take up swimming, which I think is fantastic. And that's part of the purpose and part of like, you know, de Courbetín's original goal of like, it's, you know, it needs to be about making society better.
Sure. Is that a plane in the background? Are you on a plane? No. It's and like
on a plane, you know how I do.
Yeah, sure. And like the first I interviewed 2 years ago, the first pro triathlete from Guam. Which is like a tiny island. like she like has to bike circles around the island, you know what I mean? Like, and now she's about to get one of the new flag spots. And so that's like, just, I think that is really cool. I know, like, again, it's been highly controversial recently because I don't know, because people get worked up, right? But because, like, for example, in the marathon, the US men aren't going to get to send their third person because they filled it up. Or you look at like triathlon, which we can talk about specifics now in a second, but like triathlon, like you have 4 French men or 4 British women who could all medal. And then there's people who are like, oh, that fourth person doesn't get to go, and we're going to send somebody who's going to get lapped on the. And so people get upset about that because somebody, by definition, someone is missing out, of course, because there's only so many spots.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, but I feel like it's kind of the point.
Yeah. So I think, okay, I would love for you to unpack for us, like, how the trials work. I'm aware, like, as a Canadian, I'm aware that there's like the Olympic trials in the US. It's like a whole thing.
It's a whole
like
thing.
People try to qualify for the Olympic trials as like the pinnacle of their sporting career, right? A few years ago, I went to Atlanta for the marathon trials for, well, I guess it was both the men's and women's trials. And
but you didn't care about the men.
Kelly, there were like 500 women who could run under 2:45 for the marathon. I've never seen so many like footed young ladies, like just like I'm intentionally using a funny phrase there, but like I've never seen so many fast women just like all in the same place running past. Like it was very inspiring. And we don't have that. Like we don't in Canada. I know that we do have Olympic trials.
You do have Olympic trials.
Same way. It's not as big a competition. It's not as big a deal.
I was like going to say, you guys just had the Swim Olympic trials like a week and a half ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And because I said like a friend of mine, their kid was there. So I was kind of like following along with his progress. But
I think it's a very American. So again, let's go back to how the Olympics like used to be decided, right? And it used to be like Harvard and Yale would be like, who do we want to send this year? And then they'd like send their team of 10 men. And that was it, right? Like everyone's read, I'm like not making that up. Everyone's read the whole Boys in the Boat book. And the whole big deal that year was that like the rowing team was from the University of Washington, right? And they almost didn't get to go because they like didn't have the money. So it was basically like who could afford to pay their own way, who were the upper crust, the kind of like the boys we want to have representing us over there. And that was just who went. And so like, and I think that was like baked. I'm picking the US because I like obviously know the US, but I think that's sort of baked into how everyone did it, right? You have like the Roger Bannisters of like, right? Like that's just, yeah.
Or even the people, like even from the point of view of like the folks who can afford to take the time to be that good at sport. So like there was definitely and because the Olympics has a history of amateurism, up until relatively recently in Olympic history, it's like not only the people who can afford to do sport at a high level, but they can afford to like do more of it, not necessarily work full time, like can afford the
like even the idea of amateurism is really like the hobby farmer, the gentleman runner, right? The like, in my free time, I go down to the club. Yes.
Yeah. It was definitely a different value system than us. We're like, now we're like, people work hard, they sacrifice everything to get there. These are more the stories that we tell. Whereas like back then it was like, I just showed up and won. Amazing.
So that's very much how it was. And then the trials, like you look at in the same way that the US adopted standardized testing as a way, I know there's lots of problems with standardized testing, but it was adopted as a way to get out of the whole like, oh yes, my grandson will go to your school, right? Like we were going to create a objective marker that anyone could like study and take this test and get into the best schools, right? Like that. And the trials kind of came out in the same way, like time period, right? That we as a country, the US, very deeply, deeply believes in meritocracy to a fault, like to our own detriment at this point, because we use like the live meritocracy to justify a lot of ills in America. But we very deeply believe in that. And so we were like, we wanted to create a system whereby we knew that the best 3 or 2 would go to the Olympics, as opposed to like, right? So it was like, we want to have this thing, and then they will be the best in the country, and they will go.
And like theoretically, that's great, right? But then
theoretically, the SATs are great, right? Like that's the whole idea.
Totally. And then like, what happens when? Right. So does that system of the trials create the best performances in the Olympic Games?
Probably not, right? Like, so that's the whole, like, so we still very, very, very deeply cling to a trials, right? And we still have them for swimming, for track, for gymnastics. Well, gymnastics is a little more mixed. For right, like we still very much have a trials, and it's like best 3 go.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, the problem is, and there's like countless examples of this, is that like one, you could have the best people in the world. Like you could have the gold medal favorite who flats on their bike that day, or gets sick that day, or like is hurt now, but actually would be totally on form a month and a half later. And so that's like, there's a ton of examples of that throughout the years. And so of course, then there's this concern, like, or so you have all those examples, or you have the thing where like, okay, this person was able to be top 3 on trials because they peaked and they went all out and they killed themselves and they had to get carried to the hospital after. But then are they going to perform like that well 4 or 5 weeks later? Like,
I can tell you, Kelly, I can tell you from personal experience, my fastest 10K ever was when I was trying out to be on the Scottish national team for triathlon, because you had to meet the A standard in either the swim or the run. And I was like, I could do the B standard in the swim, so that's fine. I mean, it had to still hit the B standard, you know, but the A standard I was like, this is my chance. I never run that fast for 10K again, which is like totally against like the whole purpose, which is like, we should have been trying to like develop me into someone who could run a even faster 10K, right? So I can see where you end up in this kind of situation where someone's like, they put in every single ounce of everything they have into getting to the games and then don't perform.
Yeah. And I think in this era where like medal counts are really important to a lot of countries and to like funding and all that, a lot of people are concerned that that's not like giving us the best team on the day, right? But then what's the alternative is a selection committee that sits around and decides who's going to do best.
Right.
And that's like, I think we can all, like, I know there are people out there who think that is the way to go, but then you get down to like, well, who gets to decide? Are they going to have biases? Of course they're going to have biases. Are they going to necessarily know, right? Like you look at the marathon Olympic trials again, like in the US, we had those this year. And the 3 women, of those 3, only 1 I would have picked, right? And then you're like, well, am I wrong? Or are they wrong? And maybe I was wrong. Right? Like, it's just sort of, you don't leave yourself open for possibilities.
Right. Exactly. So wait, the countries that don't have trials?
It's basically everyone except the US and Canada.
Okay. So what do they do? How do they
Right. So I think a lot of countries do a combo thing where there's some kind of set criteria. Like if you win the world championships or if you podium at the world championships, you automatically get your spot. Or they create like a list, right? Like, let's look at triathlon, because the triathlon qualification period just ended this past weekend. So you're here, so it's been in the news a lot. And a lot of those countries had things where it was like a top 5 at the Paris Olympic test event last year would earn you your spot, or a podium at the World Championships would earn you your spot. Or then they would go to, and then if that didn't fill the spots, then it would be like the top ranked athlete in the rankings in the top 10, right? Like they would go to rankings, and then so there a lot of countries do that where there are set objective markers, and then they'll go to a selection committee to fill the rest out, right? Because then they'll be like, okay, we have our medal hopefuls or whatever. Now we need to fill it out with and you see this in gymnastics, like now we need someone who's really good at the beam, and we're going to throw that person in there to fill out the team, right? Because that's the way gymnastics works now in the US, is you can earn, like if you win nationals, you can earn your, like 2 people can earn a spot, and then they fill it out with picks.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I think so triathlon basically all works that way. Cycling all works that way. A lot of countries work that way for all of their sports. I actually think that's probably the best, because it still leaves you the chance that you can like write your own destiny.
Right.
But it also leaves some room for like, you know, if I'm trying to think of like the best if Sha'Carri Richardson like falls down in the 100 meters, we could still like at the trials, we could still pick her, right?
Pick her, yeah. I see the pros and cons. I also see how like picking could like ends up wide open to abuse and bias and all kinds of things.
It's just it's also really funny. It's just so un-American. Like I just joking about it. So my husband earned a B standard spot for the Olympic team in Ireland. Right. Ireland opted, and a lot of countries do this, not to send anyone who wasn't a medal contender, Like Britain will do that sometimes.
Mhm.
Canada's done that in running where
Yeah,
they're like,
I
we're only
remember.
going to. Right.
Mhm.
So this was not, they didn't say they were going to do that in the Irish criteria. They just decided. So they just decided he was not selected. They weren't going to fill out the team.
Right.
The spot rolled down to another country, actually rolled to the US. Now, if that happened in the US, because it wasn't written into their criteria and it's very, like there would have been a law, right? Like there's a very clear, like there would have been a appeal, there would have been a lawsuit. Like you could not
Mhm.
do that in the US because like
Mhm.
it must be as it is written because we are very
Yes.
clear. But in Ireland, like, but there it was just like, oh, well,
Hmm.
that's a shame.
Okay, so can you explain, like, we recently had our triathlete Taylor Knibb.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone can fully explain this situation,
I
but
figured it out. It took
you
me a
figured
while.
it out? Okay. So she qualified for the Olympics at the test event in Paris last year
In
by winning
triathlon.
in triathlon.
She got 5th place, but
she got 5th place, but she was the top American.
Yes.
Okay. So that's how she qualified. So she's pre-qualified like a year ahead of time for the Olympics in triathlon. I mean, just as a side, we saw her in Kona. We talked to her. We interviewed her. She came 4th of the Ironman World Championships.
In between, she also like won 70.3 worlds, did her first ever Ironman, got 4th at the World Championships.
like just like a amazing athlete, clearly, right? And she also did have a stint as a pro cyclist, which we talked to her about, right? Am I right about that?
Well, yeah. So she had a pro cycling contract, but she was only racing like time trials. If that makes sense. Like she never has done a pro road race, which only matters because of where we're going with this conversation.
Right. So then recently she qualified by winning the U.S. National Time Trial Championship. And so she automatically qualified for the Olympics for the time trial. Am I right about that?
Yes.
But then that potentially gave her a spot on the road team as well, which like seems like a weird qualifying system.
So I went and I read the US cycling criteria, right? And so the way they like criteria are always written as like an if X, then Y, but if X doesn't happen, then Z. And if X and Y don't happen, then right. Like so it's always this like so it's like very confusing.
Yeah.
Right. So but that being said, there's basically a clause where like, yeah, you win the US has 2 spots in the time trial and 2 spots in the road race. And they decided that the way they were going to do like automatic qualification, because road races can be weird, you know what I mean? Like was either you like win the worlds or podium at worlds in the road race or the time trial, you win a stage of one of the grand tours or the grand tour, right? So there were ways that you could have gotten your automatic spot before that, if that makes sense, but only one person had. So there was still a spot left. And so then the next one went to whoever wins the nationals in the time trial, because the logic I think there was like, well, this person's the best time trialist, then they can do the time trial. And the logic was, if at that point nobody had won a grand tour and nobody had won a world championship, then also this person obviously is a good cyclist, like they should also get a spot in the road race, right?
Right.
So she kind of like got one almost on accident, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So like I think, and for anyone outside of cycling to understand, it's sort of like in the world of cycling, the idea that you would win the time trial and not be great at road racing or not be like extremely great, it's like Olympic level great at road racing is kind of unheard of. So for someone to like kind of launch in and potentially like, and potentially like just not have the exact skill level as like an Olympic road racer would have is such an unusual situation.
It's such like, to be totally clear, like the woman she beat by 11 seconds in the time trial, who got second, then went on and won the national title in the road race, won a stage at the Vuelta, but that hadn't been one of the ones that qualified you for. So anyway, so she's a very, very good international pro cyclist road racer. So it like wouldn't have been a problem. It would have completely made sense if she had got that spot. But Taylor Knibb got the spot, and Taylor Knibb has never done a pro road race in her life. So she is not going to do the road race. She said she's not going to do the road race. But now you get down to this whole other thing. And this is where it's like, I think we can talk a little about this. Like, this is where it's very weird because all these things are written super, super detailed, again, because like lawsuits happen. And so it's very specific. And so the US has only 2 spots in the road race, 2 spots in the time trial. Every country only gets a max of 4 athletes.
Right.
So other countries that have more spots, they still have to use athletes in both events. They can't just have people, but because we don't have as many spots because we aren't as highly ranked UCI, I think they might be able to sub somebody in. So it gets all these like quota things that I think nobody ever pays any attention to except for like 24 people in the world are very, very complicated. But then you get down to it and it's why some people make it and some people don't.
Right. And honestly, like I think a lot of the quota things that we have are about. So first of all, like when I first decided, okay, we need to try to work towards gender equality in the games, like to have an equal number of women and men at the games. The challenge was that they didn't want to have too many athletes at the games. Like they had to have, like they couldn't just keep bulking out the games. It just turns into this huge thing, right? So it's like, how do you equalize without like taking something away from the men, which is the constant.
Everyone's always worried about taking something away from the men.
Oh, God forbid. So like, you know, that's been like part of this entire process. So that's why, like, that's now we are going to see like a gender equal games in Paris for the first time. But part of the reason that those quotas exist and part of the reason why someone who qualifies for one version of their sport might also be asked to do another version of their sport is because they don't want too many like overall athletes at the games. So
there is very
complicated.
There's a cap on the total number. They aim for like 10,500. But the other factor, along with like, okay, they wanted to move that number towards gender equality, is that they also now you get into like the whole discussion of when did sports become such a big business? And it's really, I know it seems like obvious now, but it's really only the last 40, 50 years. And so now there's all these TV things. So now they want more events because they want more TV. They want more medals because they want more TV. They want more, right? Like but they don't want to add athletes, which is why you're seeing like all these mixed relay events and all like, so there's all these parameters around like, you can add events, but you can't add athletes. And so there's all these caps on like how many athletes a country can bring in each of, like, so for swimming, for example, there's a cap on how many swimmers there can be for Team GB, for Team US, like you can only bring, which is why Britain decided not to bring medal contender. But it's also why, so at the US trials now in swimming, being top 2 doesn't guarantee you a spot anymore because they can only bring 28 swimmers, female swimmers or whatever it is. And so if Katie Ledecky does 8 events, great. That like uses up a whole bunch, right? Then a whole bunch of other people can come.
Right.
But if she doesn't, then that takes off like more, then there's more people that are filling each of those spots.
Right. And so what is the reason, like, what's the reason? Like, I know that they're limiting the number of athletes, right? Is that like to stop the strain on the location itself, like just to stop the swell of how big the actual games are, like the venues that you need, like the support, the referees, you know, everything.
Right.
Like it's expensive, right? And we know that like for every country that puts on a games, it doesn't necessarily come out like net positive financially, right? So we're trying to like basically make sure that the country isn't going into debt in order to host a games. Is that kind of, am I following?
I mean, I think that's probably the like, what's the word? The nice way to say it, you know?
Macro. Yeah. The nice
way to say it. There is this whole thing. IOC has like everybody called their visions 2030 back in the day because 2030 sounded really far away.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was like an Olympic vision 2030. And it was, one of the things was to like make it more sustainable for host cities, for like a long-term vision of the games that like can come to a place and be a positive influence and not just like destroy the town. So I think there is an amount where they are trying to keep it. There are definitely also people who are very territorial about like who gets to be an Olympian and they don't want it to like not mean anything anymore. It's the same people who are worried about like the Mexican skier, which is like, kind of dumb.
Universality slots and whatnot.
So those are the same people where like, you know how they added some sports for Paris, but then some of those sports won't be in LA and they added different sports for LA. So there's also a lot of like, there is a desire to like add sports because we want younger audiences because again, like TV, money, sponsorships, but there's also this like, we must keep the purity of the games thing, which is very, very weird.
Pierre de Coubertin.
Yes.
Pierre de Coubertin. Interestingly too, like I did a while back, like I looked into like the growth of triathlon, right? And like this is our sport, so we'll tend to talk about a little bit more then. But like I think it's super interesting that like triathlon actually grew because
Of the Olympics.
because of the Olympics, and actually because we were able to make an argument that we could be a gender equal sport. So like from a sport that like did the first event in like the 70s, right, to actually be in like the 2000 games in Sydney for the first time. It's a very quick evolution for a sport. And the reason for that is that they were able to go, it was like Les McDonald who was able to say, listen, like they're looking for gender equality. We have to create depth in the women's field and show like the Olympic movement that we can have a sport that has like a great women's field. And so that is literally, it was like literally to get into the games. And they literally created a version of the triathlon that included drafting and going around in circles so that it was good for television, so that it could go into the Olympics. And so I just think that's an interesting reverse engineered way of like, then triathlon saw like insane growth after the 2000 games, right? But all of that was like reverse engineered to create gender equality in our sport, to get into the games, to grow the sport.
And you see that now, like breakdancing is the one that's like going in this year, that a lot of people are curious like how that'll play out. There are some sports that they do see bigger, and then there's some sports that get added and it's just sort of like, well, that didn't work.
Yeah.
Like that's a shame.
Like, what? Give me an example.
Well, I think they're all gone, right? Like we've added, like basically the problem becomes if it isn't the pinnacle of the sport. It's like baseball and soft, like, and the thing that sucks about baseball not being in the Olympics, or like, I actually don't remember if it got added back for LA or not, because they're always adding and taking it out. But the thing that sucks about that is that then softball gets pulled too. And for softball, it actually is the pinnacle. So you're like, this whole gender equality battle takes us down with it sometimes, you know?
Yeah, not surprisingly. Okay, so Kelly, I asked like when I knew our discussion for this week, I asked ChatGPT, what is the point of the Olympic Games?
And
okay, so I think we should discuss the answers. There's 8 points here. Okay. So number one is promoting peace and unity. Agree or disagree?
I mean, that's definitely what they would say. That's the whole like Korea's walking in together. Do you remember that opening ceremony? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Celebrating athletic excellence.
Sure.
It's an easy one. Yeah. Check. Okay. It's number 2 though. It's just like interesting, right? Cultural exchange and understanding.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, I think that's one of the, I think that was his whole mission. Pierre's mission. Yeah.
Inspiring future generations.
Right. I don't actually care that much about that, but it is a big thing.
I think it's important. I think it is. I mean,
I know. I always feel like everyone's always worried about inspiring. And it's sort of like one of those things about like, well, what about when those people become adults? Like, are they just supposed to, like, I always just feel like it, whenever everyone always worries about their kid, it's like, well, then when your kid grows up and they're just worried about their kid, what's the point? Like, what's the end game? That's all I ever think about.
Well, right. But if you, for example, like if the end game could be not just the inspiring, but like by doing their sport, they're also inspiring. Like these things are not mutually exclusive.
Sure.
See what
but
I'm saying?
I don't feel like the goal has to be inspiration.
I don't think it should be number 4. Maybe we move that.
I'm just saying, sure, lots of people probably agree. I'm just like, whatever.
You're just over it.
Yeah.
Well, I agree. Okay, here's one. Economic and social impact.
I don't think that's the goal of the Olympics.
It actually says hosting the Olympics can bring significant economic benefits to the host city and country.
Not since 1984.
Exactly. I was like,
Well, okay, so here's an example. All right. So I lived in LA for a year. LA had the 84 Olympics, right? It was the last Olympics where the commercial model behind the scenes, which like a lot of people are like, was different than it is now. And the city retained a lot of the rights, like the sponsorship rights and revenue rights. So LA actually made money off that Olympics. And to this day, they have an LA 84 foundation that funds like all the public pools in the city. There's all these, like I used to swim at pool, like they funded kids programs to like, swimming was big for whatever reason. So it funds all these learn to swim programs. And the LA 84 foundation like really does a lot of stuff in the city. But then coming out of that, the IOC basically was like, well, we would like that money. And they changed how that revenue share works. And so now it's actually quite hard to make money.
Yeah. I feel like that's a That's a bit of like something that the Olympic movement wants everyone to believe.
Right.
Necessarily.
Right.
Although it does say it can leave a lasting legacy in terms of sports facilities and urban improvements. So
It
ChatGPT
can.
says it can. Promotion of fair play and integrity.
I feel like that one would be up for debate, right?
We've maybe slid back in some ways.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll talk about like doping and that kind of stuff in a future episode.
Sure. I feel like we don't need to tackle the whole.
We don't have to take it all today.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Historical and symbolic significance.
That's the point of the Olympics? Like, that's a point? I don't think that can be a point. You cannot answer what is the point with the answer being it is significant. That is not an answer.
Right. But I think I think, not that I'm like the defender of OpenAI, but like I think potentially it's the historical connection to our athletic roots, if you will.
Forefathers, yeah.
Okay, and the last one, I thought this was interesting, is the advancement of gender equality.
Again, I don't know that that's the point. I'm sure like IOC would want you to believe that now. And yes, this is like the first gender equal Olympics. And the Olympics has certainly been better on that than like
than any other sports institution, right?
But I don't know that that's the point. Like, I don't think that was like the goal when we were like mimicking naked men from Greece, like going out. That's like where this came from, right? Like in the modern Olympics was like, let's mimic what the Greek men used to do when they like wrestled naked and like argued about Aristotle. Like that was the point, was not gender equality. The point was like men being men. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the point, yes, gender equality was definitely not on the agenda of the original modern Olympic Games, nor the ancient Olympic Games. But we've come a long way.
We have. So there you go. But the trials are coming up, like you mentioned. They're a big deal here, and I think we kind of have hinted at like it can kind of change a lot of people's lives, right? Like I think that's why people get so into the trials, get so into the Olympics, because it really I like know people personally that I'm like, dude, your life might change this summer, right? Like, and that's crazy when you think about it, and it's crazy, and not to be all like I do get over the whole inspo thing, but then that could inspire somebody else, and you just don't know like who's going to be the person that watches that.
Yep. Well, I agree. I used to love watching the Olympic Games. I still do.
The Olympics,
yeah, it's because we find it inspiring. Kelly, I'm calling you on your shit on the inspiring thing. You find it inspiring.
I love the Olympics.
Watch it because you find it inspiring. And
I find inspiration as a primary goal problematic because it puts then your personal achievements as it reflects them as only like being important as long as they're important to others. When in reality, whether or not anybody watches you do something amazing does not matter, right? Like you did it because like if nobody had watched Jasmine Paris win Barclays, like she still would have won Barclays, or not won because you don't win Barclays, but like she would have finished Barclays and it still would have meant everything to her. So that's why I find the whole like and it's so framed in gender. That's why I find it super problematic. If that makes sense. I don't like it.
I agree with all of those things. I also think as one of a list of 8.
It's okay. It's acceptable.
I'm good with it. I mean, Jasmine Paris inspired me, and I'm never going to go do the Barclays marathons.
No. I did before we get back to the Olympics, I was running one of my long ultra trail run. You just talk to whoever's around you. And the guy I was running with was absolutely convinced after seeing that he could finish 3 laps at Barclays, no problem. And I was like, no, you cannot. Like, you are about the same speed as me. And no, you cannot. Like, absolutely. But it made it seem possible.
See, he was inspired.
He was inspired.
He was inspired, Kelly.
I will tell you though that like, and I don't know, I don't know if you've ever been to the Olympics. I've been to the Olympics. Like, it does have, for all that, there are these huge problems now with countries hosting and like the money then also distorts the incentives and all this stuff. It does change like a town and a place. And so like France is ready for a home. Like they are very, very pumped about what this could mean for France. Like, and like that triathlon, because they care a lot about triathlon, is set up to be a like French athlete winning in front of the Eiffel Tower on primetime TV. You know what I mean? Like they have set up that way. And when I talk to people, because I've talked to a lot of like USOPC and like Olympic people here in the US, and we have LA next. And my husband like works in California, right? Everyone is already not just like looking ahead to LA, but looking to if we can get some, if what happens, if what should happen happens, and we like, you know, have like huge numbers of kids watching and huge numbers of people watching, and you get these right, and Americans win in America, in LA, can we be ready to capitalize on that, right? Like, can we have the resources and the programs and the coaches and the infrastructure for that influx then after?
Right, like post 2028.
Yeah.
Right. I think you can.
You think we can? There you go.
I'm excited. I'm excited to be in Paris this summer. I'm excited to see the games come back to North American soil. So it's going to be a cool few years coming out of, like we talked about last week, like coming out of Beijing, Tokyo, like where we didn't, because of COVID and various other things, like didn't have the crowds. It's just been a rough couple of years for the Olympic movement. So
I think there's very much this sense, and like I went to the US Olympic Media Summit thing, and they talked a lot about, we just didn't see the usual bounce that we do after Olympics from Tokyo or from Beijing, because it just was small, right? It just was like, I mean, there was like everyone had shit going on in their lives, right? Like it was just sort of like, it wasn't as much because everything was happening. And so there's really the sense that like this summer is going to be all this like there's pent up inspiration waiting to happen.
Yeah. I think we're seeing that elsewhere in other industries. Like I think we're seeing it, for example, like the music industry is booming in terms of live events right now.
Sure.
Like when you go, like my daughter's super into music, right? So she's like, the number of the concert lists that she sends me, like there's events like people are getting out and doing things, right? And I think that just like generally happening in the world is going to lead to like a really big turnout in Paris, really big viewership, and a lot of excitement.
And I do think it will also, the other thing is, the reason I think you and I always loved the Olympics as kids, and probably still do, is because it is like, it has historically been the only time you really saw women's sports, and it still is one of the premier stages. And you put that on top of a time when I was at some like dumbass political fundraiser last night, and somebody was like telling me, they were like, oh, they're talking about Premier League soccer. And they were like, oh, is there like women's on that too? And I was like, yes, there is. They're like, I never hear about it. And I was like, well, I hear about it all the time. And they were, and anyway, then they start telling me about, you know, like, oh yeah, the basketball and the Olympics this year. And so I think there's just like, there's this energy, there's appetite right now, and it's going to feed that. And that's why I was joking about like, you have friends that you're like, your life may blow up this summer because there's an appetite for like another Caitlin Clark, not to be right, but there's like, people are ready and they want to watch it and they want to see it. And
and they're more than ever ready to watch the women.
Yes.
And I'm also like I'm actually super ready to watch some other sports too.
Oh yeah, not basketball.
You know what I mean? Like I love basketball. That's great. However, you know, I love the diving. I love the swimming. Like these are not things, I know that there are other competitions. I know I could watch it during the year, but I don't. Right.
I always get into like one really randomly. I always get into like one, and I never know what it's going to be. Last time it was fencing. Got really into fencing. Yeah. Something then you like, then all of a sudden, you know, you don't know anything about gymnastics for 4 years. And all of a sudden you are like, how could they call that? That is ridiculous.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm excited for that too. So Kelly, amazing. What are we going to talk about next week?
So I think we're going to look back a little bit more at the history. We have a guest coming next week to talk about how running has shaped our understanding of like physiology, particularly women's physiology. And like, because a lot of our understanding of science and sports and medicine, or of science and medicine and, you know, what we can do with our bodies has come from sports. So we're going to look a little more at that. And then we are going to start diving into like topics that we know are going to be big this year, like mental health, like postpartum, you know, return to training, like nutrition and fueling, doping. I want to talk about para one week too, because I've talked to a lot of para athletes, and this may be one of the first years where they're really getting treated not equally. Like I know they still get shortchanged a lot, but they're getting like actual prize money. Not prize money because they don't get, but medal bonuses from the U.S.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about like all those topics coming up.
Amazing.